hands will tremble, your eyes dare not blink. Face that shadow holds something darker than you think. Often a touch will freeze your heart as you encounter things of an unholy art. For there is nothing more concerning than a demon's bark when you find yourself alone in the dark.
Those words could have very easily been used to be the opening for Alone in the Dark. Quite possibly one of the greatest games ever made. As both the father and grandfather to games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Amnesia, and even a lesser extent Left 4 Dead. Alone in the Dark is a game that really helped change the genre of survival horror by creating it. Yeah, Resident Evil gets the credit for creating survival horror, but Alone in the Dark is truly the first real good survival horror game. Don't get me wrong, there's survival horror games before that, it's just they weren't that good. As such, this gives Alone in the Dark extra prestige because it's the first really good survival horror game. And that means that successor games have a lot to live up to. For the most part, they do. I haven't actually played any of them or the original, mainly because I don't own a computer they can run on, but yeah. And I really don't believe in emulators either. I actually set out to remedy that, so I went out and got a copy of Alone in the Dark. And this is where the trouble starts. Because the guy I got it from was one that I used to trust a lot. And when I asked him if Alone in the Dark, the New Nightmare for Game Boy Color, was anything like the original Alone in the Dark, he flat out lied to me and told me it's the same exact game. So I gave him $15 for it. I hate that guy now. Still, the fact is, they made Alone in the Dark for the Game Boy Color. And it's not that good. I mean, I will say I'm honestly impressed that they managed to get some 3D on the Game Boy. And, well, Nintendo didn't really try doing that until they got to the Game Boy Advanced. But still, the 3D is few far between, and the vast majority of the graphics is not very good. So, let's go over why $15 is too much to spend on Alone in the Dark, the New Nightmare for Game Boy Color. Well, let's start out with the most basic problem. It's a survival horror game with a random encounter system. Please let that sink in. That means you have a limited amount of ammo and potentially an unlimited number of encounters. True, you can pick up ammo in the encounters, but you also have to kill stuff to get the ammo. And most of the time, my bullets and knives and all that stuff keeps missing enemies. Put that in perspective of how useless a random encounter system is in a survival horror game. Picture if in Final Fantasy, instead of fighting monsters all the time, you played Tetris. Yeah. Now have it that you have a limited number of moves to make in Tetris, and if you don't make it in that number of time, you die. That might actually be that game idea. So I write that down. Either way, I'm not criticizing the random encounter system. I mean, I do kind of like it, but it just feels out of place in a survival horror game. Oh well. In the actual game, you play as Edward Cornby, who's working with Elaine and Cedric to find Charles Fisk, Edward Cornby's partner who died, but he was working with Elaine Cedric. network. Either way, you end up on an evil island in a forest full of evil spiders, and you go through the evil forest and get inside the mansion and discover your partner is trapped in a mirror. And you have to go and find magical amulets so you can go talk to them and try to get them out. Along the way, you run into the journals of Alan Morton, the head of the place. And I'll be honest, I kind of like Morton. Why? He's trying to kill everyone. That's a fun trait in the character. Although I will admit, he's a very poor boss. And by very poor, I mean very, very poor. But that comes later. In the mansion, when you finally find the amulet and then find all the keys to get out, you have to get through a instant death room with a tentacle monster in it. After that, you go to the moors. And this level is pretty much you just fight Alan Morton. And he teleports around and stuff, but he still follows the same basic AI as the normal bad guys, so he's pretty easy to kill. After that, you go to the fort. And after you go to the fort, you find the laboratory, and in there you find the ugly idol, which then teleports you back to the mansion where you escaped from and fight Alan Morton again, where he follows the same exact patterns, has the same exact amount of health, does the same exact amount of damage, and it's just a copy and pasted version of your first encounter with him. I'm placing that more on lazy game development than the game itself, but yeah. When you finally defeat Morton, you escape from the island as the sun rises, and Charles decides, no, I'm not going to be alive anymore. See you guys, and goes ghosting away to some greater world. That and you and Cedric do something. Yeah, not quite sure what you do after that. I mean, you do see a newspaper that Alan Morton's missing, and you're kind of like, ha ha ha, I killed him so very hard. That's the story of Alone in the Dark New Nightmare. As for gameplay, it's a simplified version of Resident Evil. Again, Resident Evil is a slightly more complex version of Alone in the Dark, so it's Alone in the Dark, I guess. It would be a lot worse, and I'd probably be harsher on it if it wasn't Alone in the Dark, since that game's got a lot of reputation. Still, doesn't really live up to the standards that I have no clue what they are. I'm gonna be honest. Capcom was right. What am I talking about? Well, around the same time this came out, Capcom was planning on doing the same exact thing with the first Resident Evil. They did eventually release the Resident Evil game for Game Boy, and I really would like to get my hands on it, but I haven't been able to find it for a reasonable amount, so yeah. Either way, the fact is a proof of concept. This proves Capcom could have put out Resident Evil for the Game Boy Color, and probably lost some prestige along the way. Still, I gotta give them credit for ambition. They managed to fit a 30-minute game on the Game Boy. No, wait, the original New Nightmare was several hours long. Yeah, they cut out a lot of stuff. Not quite sure what, since I haven't played the original, but I do know there's a huge time difference between the two games. Yeah. Oh well. That's Alone in the Dark, the New Nightmare. If you would like to play the game for Game Boy, go ahead and do it. Not quite sure how the other versions are, but yeah, it should be fun. And at the very least, it's not the remake version. You all know what I'm talking about. And if you don't,